Hello everyone, welcome to another CSS tutorial. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at CSS Sprites. Now perhaps this is a term that you've heard of before, but you're not exactly sure what it is. What is a CSS Sprite? Now before I go into a detailed explanation, let me begin by showing you visually what a sprite is. So on the left here we see possibly the most basic web page ever created. And this home icon, if we hover over it, it becomes a light blue. And when we click it, it becomes a dark blue. And when we let go of the click, it becomes back to the lighter blue. So, why is this a sprite? What is the term sprite referring to in this instance? Well, you might think that this is three different JPEG files, right? So we'd have one JPEG file for the white house, another JPEG file for this light blue house, and a third JPEG file for the dark blue. We don't. Because this is a CSS sprite, it's only using one image file. How do we achieve this? Well, let's take a look. On the right side of your screen, this is the first house that I drew, and then I drew this blue house, and then this slightly darker blue house. But to make it a sprite, I then combined all three into one image, stacking them on top of each other. So they're all 120 pixels tall by 120 pixels wide, so they're just evenly stacked upon each other. Now you can do this using Photoshop. If you don't have Photoshop, there's a free program called GIMP. Just Google GIMP editor, GIMP image editor, and it'll pop right up. Now, before we go into detail of how to actually achieve this with CSS code, I want to first address why we're doing this. Why is this desirable to have all three states in one image file? The simple answer is speed, page load times. What I mean by this is every time you view a website, your web browser connects to that particular web server and downloads all of the graphics, all of the CSS files, all of the JavaScript files. It loads each individual file. Now, which website do you think will load faster? The website with 60 images, so that's 60 HTTP requests just for images, or the website with only one or two images, so only one or two HTTP requests for images? Obviously, the site with fewer HTTP requests will load faster, and this is always a good thing. In the modern world, people don't want to wait, so the faster your website loads, the better. Also, some people speculate that page load times play a role in Google PageRanks. So I could blabble on for a long time, but the short description of why we're doing this is to make your pages load faster. Also, we don't have to preload images for the hover state. In the past, if you were using two separate images to get this light blue to load perfectly on hover, you might have had to preload the image. Those days are long gone, and it's largely thanks to the sprite technique. So before we go into the code, there's one last thing I want to show you, and that's the final product. And we see down here the contact icon, the envelope icon, also has three states. I went one step further, and we could have set up something like this to achieve this. But since this is a video on CSS Sprites, we're actually using this all in one. So we have 6 states in one image file. That means instead of 6 HTTP requests, we have 1 HTTP request. Now you can go ahead and do the math on larger sites that have 15, 20, 30 icons used in the interface, or websites that get a lot of page requests, a lot of traffic every day. This is just a fantastic method, a great strategy to have up your sleeves as a webmaster and a web developer. So enough talking, let's get into the code that makes this possible. So this is our HTML page. We have the 2 icons wrapped in a span just to give them a unique class. And I'm going to go into our style sheet and just erase everything. We're going to write it all on the spot so you can learn. So I just refreshed. We see that our page is reduced down to just 2 simple text links, home and contact. No graphics, no different styles. So let's dive right in and write some new CSS. Now the first thing I'm going to do is create a common class that both icons will use. So span with a class of icon. If we go back to the markup really quick, we see that you can apply multiple classes to an element. So this top home link has a class of home, but then it also has a second class, just a space, and then icon. And we see a similar strategy with this second link, contact space icon. So we're creating a shared style span icon, and we want the hyperlinks inside this, oops, to be display block. And we also want to hide the text. We're using image replacement for icons. So text indent, negative 9,999 pixels. Okay, now let's go ahead and create the rules for the home link, our first icon. So span home. Okay, so our home icon is a square. It has a width of 120 pixels. It has a height of 120 pixels. Next up, we need to add the background image. Background. Okay, now before we refresh and preview our page, let's actually go ahead and add the hover state. So span home, hover. Okay, we're going to use the property, the CSS property, background position. And we're going to say 0 pixels horizontally, and we want to offset by 120 pixels, right? Because this is our starting zone. We start out in the top left. So we want to shift the background up 120 pixels so that this blue house has been shifted up into the position. It'll all make sense when we check it out in the browser. So we see that it's working. Let's go one step further. It might cement how these background values are working for you. So span home a active. So this is the state that is used once an item is clicked. So background position, we don't want to go to this left or right. We want to move it up another 120. So that brings us to a total of 240 pixels. There is a little bit of arithmetic involved with CSS sprites. So if we refresh, we see that the clicking is already working, the hover is working. It's really quite simple. So now that we're familiar with the strategy, let's go ahead and set up the code for our next icon, the contact icon. So we'll create a new rule, span contact. It is a much smaller icon. It's half the size, so it's 60 wide and has a height of 60 as well. Now, this is where it gets, it's not tricky, but you need to pay attention. Images, sprites, JPEG. Okay, so instead of 0 and then a negative 120, in this instance, if we take a look at the image, we're initially interested in the horizontal offset, and that's the first value. So we want to go to the left 120 pixels, stay to the top left. So if we refresh, we see that there's our contact icon. Let's go ahead and set up the hover rule, span contact, background position, negative 120, and now that we are shifted to the left, we want to go down 60 to get to the yellow. So negative 60. We refresh, we see that it's working. Just to recap, obviously this first value controls the horizontal, the second value controls the vertical. So span contact, a active, background position, negative 120. We want to go down again 60 to get to the bottom orange state. So if we refresh, there it is. And that will bring this video to a close. To recap, we learned why CSS sprites are a good idea. We learned the code needed to enable them. And more importantly, we learned that it's really nothing more than taking advantage of the background position property. And again, the first value controls the horizontal, the second value controls the vertical offset. And from there, it's really just a bit of basic arithmetic and working with images on a grid. That's going to bring this video to a close, guys. Thanks for watching. Hope you feel like you learned something. Bye.